The last time anyone saw Sherry Prather was October 12th.
About 3 weeks later, detectives found her remains in the woods.
Listen, though, I need the truth right now. Your only last chance to tell me the truth.
This is the honest truth. I'm scared right now. I didn't do this.
When you interrogate someone, you don't know what they're going to do when they're faced with pressure.
You're lying. Quit lying.
He was only admitting to what he couldn't deny and denying what we couldn't prove.
I didn't do anything.
He's only capable of one thing, and that is rage.
He's unpredictable, and he wants people to fear him.
He is banging his head as hard as he possibly can on the interrogation table. Wow, you're really crazy.
I am Michelle Selig. I was a homicide detective back in 2012 for the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office. As a detective, I was in child abuse and in sex crimes. 4 years of sex crimes really wears on you, and it was time for me to move on and make change. So homicide was the only step up from there. And I thought I was good enough to be in the elite club. It's rare for females to go to homicide, and it's definitely rare for females to stick around in homicide. Once I proved myself and proved my work ethic and solved my first whodunit case, I gained a lot of respect from the guys, and I stayed in that unit for 10 years. So in mid-November, I was just in the office working a normal day, and I got a phone call that missing persons detectives had been working a case for a little over a month of a missing woman named Sherry Prather.
The last time anyone saw Sherry Prather was October 12th. Her family reported her missing 3 days later.
Well, Sherry was my only child. I raised her by myself. She was just the love of my life. This was Sherry. We took this on Wednesday, and the next day is when she disappeared.
The missing persons detectives received a tip that Sherry's body was off of Braddock Road.
So they called us out saying, hey, we just want to get y'all on board, so if we find her, you know, you've already stepped into the case.
Braddock Road retains a lot of that rural look. You can go for a half mile in some directions and there's nothing but two-lane road and pine woods on either side.
You look at what you're supposed to be searching, it's overwhelming. It's a daunting task. How are we going to find anything in this?
Nobody could find her remains, so we had to call out a cadaver dog.
They thoroughly searched that area for several hours, and you begin to believe this is never going to happen. We're not going to find anything of value. And suddenly the dog alerts, sits down and barks.
And then there's this skull shining in the middle of it all.
We now know this is more than a rumor. There's a dead human here. So when one human bone is discovered, a search of a wider area begins. They find a pair of shoes. They find a shirt. They find more bones.
The bones look weathered, like they've been out there for a while. Florida weather will do that with the sun, the heat, the humidity.
There is some level of decomposition that occurs in a month's time, of course. But the real issue is carnivore involvement.
All the flesh had been picked away. That particular area of Braddock Road, there was quite a bit of scavengers out there.
Matter of fact, a pelvic bone was found up in a tree, where an animal probably skirted up the tree.
So this is a tragic mess.
So they have a collection of bones. Do they belong to Sherry Prather? Or is it someone else I don't even know about?
The remains were taken to the medical examiner's office. They identified her as Sherry Prather.
We were able to do that through some dental records. And then more importantly, you really have to determine what the cause of death was. And that is a critical piece.
Skeletal remains can speak to you if you listen.
We had a forensic anthropologist from the University of Florida come in. And they found what appeared to be a half-moon indentation in one of the ribs. And then a fragmentation of one of her vertebrae that indicated that she was shot in the back.
At that point, we knew it was a homicide.
So now it's different. It's no longer a missing person, it's a dead person. And they were murdered. And homicide detective Michelle Salick is on the case. And she is not going to walk away from this.
I just felt like, okay, this is it. I gotta solve this case.
The first step is to notify the survivors.
When I look back, I really don't know how I got through it. To know that she laid out there and those animals ripped her apart. And that was the hardest thing that I could process.
You know, Sherry Lee Prather was seen as a happy person who sang her way through life. She had 2 daughters. She had a mother who cared for her. She had friends.
She loved motorcycles. She was a great singer. She loved to go all over doing karaoke. She loved to party. She could walk in any place, and wherever she went, when we left there, she was friends with everybody. She was just a real loving person.
I really wanted to find justice for Norma Ellis for, the death of her daughter. And I read all the reports involved in this case. I found out that Sherry Prather was last seen alive on October 12th, 2012, leaving a bar on the north side called Boots and Bottles.
Boots and Bottles was known as a local bar, kind of like a pool hall. It had a reputation of being a little rowdy at times, sometimes guys riding motorcycles.
The night she disappeared, Sherry's mother drops her off at Boots and Bottles for a ladies' night out.
And then by the next day, she hadn't called, she hadn't showed up. I knew something was wrong.
So it got assigned to the missing persons unit. They started following up some pretty good leads.
During these interviews, her friends report that Sherry had been very distressed that day because she broke up with her boyfriend, so she wanted to go out and have a few drinks. They all said that Sherry was a little tipsy that evening. She was invited to a party at a private home on Trout River Road, which is in the area. They said she met a guy in the bar who's a biker. And she asked him for a ride to this party. She gets on the back of a motorcycle that belongs to a stranger. He fires it up and roars off into the night. The last thing they see is the taillight of a motorcycle.
They drive off, and nobody sees him again.
So who is that on the motorcycle with Sherry? Is he the reason she was reduced to bones?
Police identified human remains found in this wooded area last week as Sherry Prather.
Prather was celebrating a girls' night out with her friends at Boots and Bottles on North Main Street.
Now, this is a biker bar. They don't have any surveillance tapes on purpose. But across the street, there's another place of business that does.
And it showed our victim getting on the back of a motorcycle.
It clearly shows Sherry Prather with a male individual and driving away.
We just know he was a white male. You know, it appeared that he was bald. And it would have been hard to know exactly who that was.
You can't see the biker's face, but you can clearly see the motorcycle. The fact that he's riding on a Honda is an enormous clue. Now, in biker world, that is a felony. If you're not riding a Harley Davidson, you're not considered to be a biker. So who is this guy? So Selig goes to visit the bar to determine if they can learn who the biker is that Sherry left with. They make contact with a bartender. Detective Selig says, "Did you know a guy who rides a Honda that comes here all the time?" "Oh, yeah. His name is Johnny Johnson. He's the only guy that rides a Honda at that bar."
What they said about Johnny Wayne Johnson is he's rough. His nickname is Viking, and that's what he went by, and that he's from Iceland. And he's unpredictable.
Unpredictable enough to kill? Let's find out. So they track down the Icelandic Viking, and by all accounts, he is true to his name.
He's a white male, pale, red beard. He's a big man. He's very large.
He looked like a Viking. He should have had a hatchet or a warhammer or something.
He said his name in America is John Johnson, but in Iceland, his name is Magni Thorvaldsson. He speaks with an Icelandic accent. It is slight, but it is audible. He is asked, how did he meet Sherry? He's extremely cooperative. And he replies that it was that night at Boots and Bottles. Sherry said she needs a ride to a party on Trout River Road, so he agrees to take her there.
He didn't deny that that was Sherry Prather on the back of his motorcycle.
Viking says they drive to Trout River Road. They stop where this house is. Sherry says, let me go inside and talk to people, and then I'll get you in.
He said she went inside this house. I saw people looking out the window. It was a little sketchy, so I didn't know if I was going to get robbed. And so I left, and I didn't see her again after that.
The odds would say there was some encounter at this party that resulted in her untimely demise.
Viking rode with us, pointed out, you know, this is the way we went. This is where I dropped her off.
Selig goes up and knocks and gets no reply. She looks in the windows and decides this place has certainly seen better days. It's all in very poor condition. She inserts a business card in the door frame with her name and her phone number.
At that point, we had to find something else.
The major question here, who did Sherry run into at this party? Somebody she knows? Somebody that hates her? Sherry's friends told the missing persons detectives that she'd been in a dispute with her boyfriend.
Well, earlier that day, she went over to his apartment and they got into an argument. And she made him bring her home, and the whole time coming home, they were in an argument.
So when someone says to me in a homicide case, well, she's got this boyfriend, Oh, I like boyfriends. What's his story? It turns out the boyfriend's name is Daniel Dollison.
I didn't approve of him. He was real jealous of Sherry. And I always felt like he was parked in the parking lot or across the street watching who she left with, because I knew what type of person he was.
Well, what if Mr. Dollison follows Sherry to this party on Trout River Road? And the argument continues with alcohol involved and maybe a gun? Could that work? Oh boy, yeah, it could. We've been wondering if Sherry had run into someone at this house party. Could it have been her boyfriend, Daniel Dollison, that she ran into? And the arguments continued. Detectives find Daniel Dollison quite easily. He's not concealing himself anywhere. They asked him directly, "You had an argument that day. What was it about?" "Well, I wanted her to move in with me." And she said, "Absolutely not. Her mother was advancing in age. She planned on taking care of her."
She took care of me and my 2 granddaughters. 4 girls living together in one house.
So did you go to this house party on Trout River Road and run into Sherry there? No, I did not. I went to my sister's house to talk about Sherry refusing to move in with me, and I spent the night there.
And he said, "I didn't go down Braddock Road that night. I'd never been down Braddock Road before."
The alibi checks out completely. Dollison had nothing to do with her disappearance or her death. He loves that girl. Now he knows he will never see her again.
It's terrible to imagine that, you know? I wanted to protect her from all that, you know? And I couldn't be there. There won't be no closure for me until I see him fried in the electric chair.
So Selig is back to square one. Where do we go now?
At that point, I was starting to kind of run into a dead end.
Then she hears back from the people that own the house in the woods on Trout River Road, where she left her business card.
They were just, a normal mid-age, couple. They were back and forth because they were renovating the house.
They've never had a party in that house. The place has never been broken into.
They were kind of just taken back of the whole story of why I even called them. They never heard a motorcycle. They don't know anything about a Sherry Prather.
2 things become obvious to Selig after this meeting with these people. There's never been a party in this place, and the person who said there was is lying through his teeth, and his name is John Johnson, also known as Viking. The only possibility for Johnny to be lying is he's involved in her death.
At that point, he was a potential suspect, for sure.
So now, Selig has someone to refocus upon. All she knows about him is what he claims. He's Icelandic. He's 39 years old. His occupation is long-distance truck driver.
I found out he spent time for a violent felony in Georgia.
She also learns that Johnny Johnson has an ex-wife named Samantha.
I decided, you know what? Let's reach out to Johnny Wayne's ex-wife.
When you're speaking to the wife or a girlfriend, there is a tendency to protect their loved one from you. Ex-wives don't defend. Ex-wives attack.
My name is Samantha Burleson. In 2008, I met Johnny Wayne Johnson at a friend's birthday party. There was this guy that just kept staring at me. Kind of the bad boy image and quiet and mysterious. I was just getting out of a bad marriage for something new and exciting. But John changed as soon as we said I do. He went from a happy-go-lucky guy to somebody who literally terrified me. It was always mostly verbal threats. If you don't do this, I'm gonna hurt you. We separated in October of 2011. We stayed in contact because he still wanted to be there for my kids.
My first impressions of Samantha was that she really wanted to cooperate, but she was terrified of Johnny Wayne. She wanted to tell us everything, but she was so nervous, and I can understand why. Sherry Prather went missing early morning of October 12th. Samantha Burleson told me a few days later, Johnny called her and asked to meet her at a park.
He started asking me these weird questions. He goes, what would you do or how would you get rid of a person's body? I was just laughing and joking because I thought he was joking. He said, Braddock Road, that's where she's at. I was like, what are you talking about? Who's there? That's where she's at, but don't worry about it. I'm gonna take care of it. I thought it was full of I thought it was trying to scare me.
Samantha says that Viking is a pathological liar. He can't help himself but to lie constantly to try to establish his persona as a mysterious and dangerous biker.
Johnny Wayne thrives off attention from people, so he wanted attention.
This guy kept building himself up to everybody that would listen. Hey, I'm a badass, don't cross me. I'm to be feared and respected.
Samantha assumed it was another one of his fantasies.
But when they found Sherry in the woods on Braddock Road, I did not, for the life of me, want to say anything. I was so scared.
Like all homicide detectives, Selig wants to build the strongest possible case against Viking, so she comes up with a plan that has some promise.
We asked Samantha to wear a wire and meet up with Johnny Wayne in hopes that he would, again, talk about what he did to Sherry Prather that night.
That is an incredibly dangerous thing to do. This is a person she is admittedly afraid of, but she agrees to try this.
I wasn't hesitant because Sherry had a family. She had people that cared about her. That's why I did what I did.
She wanted to help so bad because she wanted him to pay for what he did.
Viking is a little bit of a mechanic, so Selig tells Samantha to call and ask Viking to check out her truck to get the conversation started.
I placed the wire in my bra. I kept worrying that he was gonna either find it or I was gonna lose it. I felt like everything was resting on my shoulders. It was just terrifying.
So we have a plan in place to catch our man Viking into confessing to the crime of murder. Is it going to work? Well, we're about to find out. Samantha has agreed to wear a wire, which is an extremely brave thing to do.
It was at his mom's garage at her house, and I was really hoping, like, okay, we're gonna get this guy.
Having to wear a wire and confront somebody by yourself, you don't know if your next breath is gonna be your last, if they're gonna find out that you were wearing a wire and betraying them. It's terrifying.
How you doing?
The truck is whining really bad, John. Can you put more power steering fluid in?
Yeah. All right.
So when he takes a look at her truck, she subtly shifts the conversation to Sherry's murder.
Okay, tell me the story.
Nothing happened. I dropped her off on Trout River. But nobody's gonna ask you anyway.
I said, you sure you're not in trouble, are you? He goes, just drop it. But what really happened?
Right now, I don't want to really get into it until it's over with. You understand what I'm saying?
Every time she brought it up, he would basically shush her and and say, we're not talking about that. I just think he was starting to get paranoid.
And all of a sudden it dawns on his pea-sized brain that maybe me running my mouth was a bad idea. So Samantha breaks the contact.
She tried her hardest. I mean, she really, really tried.
When they thanked me for doing that, but I feel like I was letting the police officers down because I didn't get John to say anything on tape. I was disappointed in myself.
Did they get what they wanted? No. But Selig is determined to solve the death of Sherry Prather.
At that point, we knew that Johnny Wayne Johnson was our suspect, but we had to find other means to prove it.
Detective Selig needs a piece of evidence linking Viking to the scene or an eyewitness confession, something more than what she currently has.
We just continued our investigation and followed up on every tip. We talked to everybody possible at Boots and Bottle Bar.
Selig becomes aware that Viking has a current girlfriend whose name is Chelsea Burton.
She was very scared. She was shaking the whole time we were talking to her. You can tell she didn't want to speak to us.
Burton tells the same exact story and sequence of events that Viking told Selig. He had dropped off this girl from the bar at a party on Trout River Road, and he came home at 2 o'clock and he went directly to bed. So what does that do? That provides Viking with an alibi.
She was just giving us enough information to act like she was cooperating, but just really not enough to do anything with.
We were confident she knew more than she was telling us. So part of our strategy was, okay, they may not be willing to speak to us now, but this is going to be something we're going to need to come back to once, twice, maybe 3 times and re-interview these people.
Detective Selig talks to everyone who's ever known or been associated with Viking. You're telling these people you're not going to go away.
I didn't want to give up on this case. It's hard to know who is responsible for the death of somebody and not being able to put them behind bars. And I just wasn't willing to suspend the case and get rid of it.
As her time continues with this tale, Selig becomes aware that Viking is not who he says he is. He says he's an Icelandic man who spent over half his life in Iceland, and he is a descendant of Eric the Red. The reality is, you're not Viking, you're Johnny Wayne Johnson from the trailer parks of Jacksonville, Florida.
He's never even been to Iceland. He doesn't even have a passport.
And your Icelandic accent is bull.
And that's how he was talking the whole time, just like this. That's not really how he talks. Johnny wants people to fear him. He just likes himself to look bigger and badder. I think that gives him some self-power, that he intimidates people.
He would talk about Viking gods and Thor. I mean, it was like the guy was living in a DC comic. The elevator didn't go up to the top floor with this guy.
Johnny Johnson is a pathetic human being. He invents this persona. How sad is that? You are so disgusted by who you are, you want to be someone else. That's very disturbed.
So a couple years goes by, and I decided, you know what? Let's reach out to Johnny Wayne's previous girlfriend again. I heard that they weren't dating anymore, so I thought, you know what? Let's go find her and see if her story changes. We made contact with her, and you would have thought the incident happened 5 minutes before we came there because she was shaking. It took a long time to get her on board and to gain her trust, but she ended up talking to us.
She admitted that she did not tell us everything that time because she was in fear of her life. She was scared that he would kill her.
She says that even though I told you he was home by 2 and he went to bed, that's not true. He didn't come home at all. I didn't see him for 2 more days. So Viking's alibi just went up in smoke.
She agreed to tell us what Johnny Wayne Johnson really told her. And that was that he did leave with Sherry Prather on the back of his motorcycle that night, leaving boots and bottles. And they did end up on Braddock Road. And apparently he got mad and he shot and killed her and drug her into the woods.
Chelsea says he forced her to go with him to Braddock Road to look for expended casings to recover them from his pistol.
She said that later he threw a gun out of her car window as they were crossing over a body of water.
She said Johnny Wayne threatened her that night in her car.
He told her if she ever told the police, he would kill her in front of her son.
She was terrified, and I can understand why.
So it bought her silence for 2 years. But time changes things, and now she's come forward.
I'm really, really depending on her statement. This was, a case that I never thought we were going to resolve.
So Selig brings Viking into an interrogation room. He's under the gun over something he thought was long forgotten. But the police don't forget, and they don't forgive. So now Viking is in the spotlight, and Selig is standing on his tail.
I was ecstatic. Like, it had been 4 years. Could not wait to hear his story.
Selig is experienced as an interrogator, so she brings Viking into an interrogation room and leaves him alone in that room, and they close and lock the door. Now, who is Viking? This fearful guy with an invented personality. His worst enemy is his mind. He begins to run with it. They leave him alone in that room for almost an hour. Viking looks like he's coming apart at the seams.
He seemed nervous because he started dry heaving into the trash can.
You all right, man?
No, I'm so bad. I'm sick.
You sick?
What's wrong with you?
I got it coming out the 2 ends. The doctors called me back today to do more blood work. They think I may have cancer.
Johnny, you're clearly lying.
He doesn't have cancer. His emotions are making him sick.
There are 2 different types of homicide suspects. There's the type that's gonna say F you as soon as you walk in the room. They ain't saying nothing. And then there's the type that wants to keep talking because they want to know what you have.
Johnny, do you remember a detective talking to you 4 years ago about the girl that was missing from Boots and Bottles?
Yes.
And I said, hey, listen, we just kind of got to recount that story. And he kind of started telling the same story.
So, Johnny, you never confessed to your friends that you killed this girl?
She tells him, people you know and have trusted have told us you have confessed to this crime and how you destroyed your gun and threw it in the river.
You're not being honest, Johnny, but you got to explain your side of the story.
And I have been. I dropped her off on Trout the River.
But you didn't.
I did.
You took her to Braddock Road.
So initially, when Selig begins her interview with Viking, she's polite and she's nice, and then finally she moves to the next phase. She starts to hammer him.
You're lying. So quit lying. There's a reason why you're on Braddock Road.
No, I don't even know where Braddock Road is.
You think you're going to convince a jury that you don't have nothing to do with that?
I wanted to call him out on his obvious lies with grace.
I didn't do this.
Well, who did?
I don't know who did.
He wasn't volunteering any additional information. He was only admitting to what he couldn't deny and denying what we couldn't prove.
So all these people are lying on you?
Yes.
For what reason?
Yes, I don't know.
He denies everything, so she just ends it. It's over.
Can I go home?
No, you cannot.
Why is that?
Because I'm charging you with murder.
I didn't do murder.
Well, I'm charging you with it, and we can prove it, Johnny.
After about 4 hours of being with Johnny Wayne, I left the room to start my paperwork for my arrest docket. And he stood up. And he violently just took his head and bashed his head into the table.
Why does he bang his head on the table as hard as he does? I don't speak with an Icelandic accent, so therefore I have no idea.
Johnny Wayne is an actor. He loves the attention, hence why he told everybody he killed Sherry Prather.
He's a killer, and now he knows that the police know he is.
We'll take care of it. I didn't do nothing, okay?
After the head-banging incident, EMTs are called. They examine him and make a decision he's probably going to be all right.
After that, I walk him over to the jail, and I book him on the charges of murder, so that felt good. Johnny Wayne did not confess to killing Sherry Prather, but he admitted enough to where it was going to make a positive impact on this case.
Despite not getting a confession, Selig has an opinion as to how Sherry Prather's murder likely unfolded.
I think that once Johnny Wayne Johnson got down Braddock Road with Sherry, he probably was trying to have sex with her. And she probably rejected him.
Clearly, something goes wrong. What that is, no one knows. Something goes south. And death results.
Braddock Road, that's where the body fell. That's where the body was dragged into the woods.
If he never told anybody, never called anybody, never said anything to anybody, he most likely could have got away with it. But he kept talking.
Detective Selig called me. It was about 12 o'clock at night, and she said, "We got him. He's arrested." And I just busted out crying.
Johnny Wayne Johnson was charged with second-degree murder. We thought we were going to actually have to go to trial, which we were ready for.
Yesterday, Sherry Prather's killer pleaded guilty to shooting and killing the mother of two. 43-year-old Johnny Johnson was sentenced to 20 and a half years behind bars.
I was feeling accomplished. Finally, 4 years, and not just hard work, because it's not about me. It's about Sherry. And finally, I was able to bring justice for Sherry Prather's family, and that felt wonderful.
Sherry was just the love of my life. She was part of me, and like even now, I just feel like part of me's missing. This is what I have left to my daughter. There's a vial on the back, and it has her ashes in it. And every time I look at it, the madder I get of what he did, and I wish I'd have killed him. 1,000 times I wish I had just went ahead and killed him.
June 4th, 2014. The evening sky above Moncton, New Brunswick, carried the last fading colors of a Canadian spring sunset. The neighborhoods in the city's north end were settling into the comfortable rhythm of an ordinary weekday. Lawns had just been cut. Children were being called inside for dinner. The distant hum of traffic drifted through the warm air. Nothing about that evening seemed remarkable. Nothing suggested that within the next few hours, one of the deadliest attacks against police officers in modern Canadian history would unfold in those quiet suburban streets. At first, the reports sounded strange rather than alarming. Residents began noticing a man walking through the neighborhood. He wasn't jogging. He wasn't walking a dog. He wasn't heading toward a friend's house. He was dressed in camouflage. And he was carrying firearms. People watched from windows. Some stepped onto porches and stared. Others reached for their phones. In a country where heavily armed individuals did not casually wander through residential neighborhoods, the sight was impossible to ignore. Calls began flowing into emergency dispatch. There was a man with guns. A man dressed like a soldier. A man moving through the streets. A man who seemed completely unconcerned that people were watching him. Within minutes, police officers from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the RCMP, were dispatched to investigate. For them, it was another call. Potentially dangerous, yes. But still just another call. The kind of call officers answer every day. The kind of call that usually ends with a conversation, a detention, paperwork, and eventually a return home. None of them knew they were walking directly into an ambush. None of them knew that somewhere in the shadows, a young man had already decided exactly who his targets would be. As patrol vehicles entered the area, the atmosphere began to change. The ordinary sounds of suburban life slowly disappeared. People who had heard the warnings retreated indoors. Garage doors closed. Curtains moved. Lights flickered behind windows. The streets became strangely empty. And somewhere among those streets, 24-year-old Justin Bourque moved quietly through the neighborhood carrying weapons and ammunition. Witnesses would later describe seeing him walk with an unsettling calmness. There was no panic. No visible fear. No sign of confusion. He appeared focused. Purposeful. As if he had rehearsed every step long before that evening arrived. For the officers responding, visibility was becoming a challenge. The landscape of the North End offered countless hiding places. Clusters of trees. Residential yards. Fences. Dark corners between homes. Every shadow had the potential to conceal danger. Yet danger often announces itself. Most violent encounters begin with shouting. Threats. Arguments. Warnings. This one would not. When the shooting started, it erupted with sudden brutality. The first shots shattered the illusion that this was a routine police response. Gunfire echoed through the neighborhood. Sharp. Violent. Unexpected. The sound traveled across streets and through backyards. People froze. Some initially believed they were hearing fireworks. Others knew immediately that something was terribly wrong. Then more shots followed. And more. The realization spread quickly. Someone was shooting at police officers. The radio traffic exploded with urgency. Officers called for backup. Dispatchers struggled to keep pace with the rapidly evolving situation. Information arrived in fragments. An officer down. Shots fired. Suspect armed. Location changing. Unknown direction. Every transmission painted a picture that was becoming increasingly grim. The hunter and the hunted had become difficult to distinguish. Officers searched desperately for a gunman who understood the terrain around him. A gunman who seemed comfortable moving through darkness. A gunman who had chosen his battlefield carefully. Across Moncton, families gathered around televisions and phones as emergency warnings spread. Social media filled with confusion and fear. Rumors multiplied. Some reports exaggerated the danger. Others underestimated it. Nobody knew exactly what was happening. But everyone understood one thing. Something unprecedented was unfolding. The streets that had felt safe only an hour earlier now felt hostile. Every tree seemed suspicious. Every dark corner appeared threatening. Residents locked doors and turned off lights. Parents checked windows repeatedly. Many remained awake throughout the night, watching, waiting, listening, wondering whether the violence had ended or whether it was still moving through the city. For the RCMP officers on scene, the reality was becoming heartbreaking. The gunman was not firing randomly. He was targeting them. Every movement carried enormous risk. Every attempt to locate him exposed officers to potential attack. And still they pushed forward. Because somewhere in that darkness were fellow officers who needed help. Friends. Partners. People they had worked beside for years. People whose families expected them to come home. As the scale of the tragedy emerged, a terrible truth began taking shape. Officers had been shot. Not one. Not two. Multiple officers. The number remained uncertain. The severity remained uncertain. But the fear spreading through law enforcement circles across Canada was immediate. This wasn't merely an active shooter. This wasn't simply a dangerous suspect. This was a direct assault on the people sworn to protect the community. As darkness settled completely over Moncton, the city entered a state of collective anxiety. Helicopters would eventually circle overhead. Tactical teams would flood into the region. Armored vehicles would appear in neighborhoods that had never seen them before. But during those first chaotic moments, uncertainty ruled everything. Nobody knew where the gunman was. Nobody knew where he would strike next. And perhaps most frightening of all, nobody knew when he intended to stop. The man at the center of the unfolding nightmare had spent years nurturing grievances that most people around him never fully understood. To neighbors, he could appear quiet, reserved, sometimes awkward. He lived in a world increasingly shaped by distrust and anger. A world where authority became the enemy. A world where governments transformed into symbols of oppression. A world where violent fantasies gradually evolved into violent intentions. Yet on that June evening, the people of Moncton knew none of this. All they knew was that armed officers were racing through their neighborhoods. All they knew was that emergency vehicles were screaming through intersections. All they knew was that fear was spreading faster than information. Inside homes throughout the city, televisions glowed late into the night. Families sat together in silence. Some refreshed news websites repeatedly. Others monitored police announcements. Many called loved ones simply to hear their voices. The ordinary concerns of daily life disappeared. Work schedules no longer mattered. Household chores no longer mattered. Tomorrow's plans no longer mattered. Everything narrowed to a single question. What was happening outside? The answer would become clearer with every passing hour. And it would become more tragic. 3 RCMP officers would never return home. 3 families would soon receive news capable of dividing life into 2 chapters, before and after. Before the phone call. After the phone call. Before the knock on the door. After the knock on the door. Those moments had not yet arrived. But they were approaching. Somewhere, spouses remained unaware. Somewhere, children continued their evening routines. Somewhere, parents believed their sons were simply working another shift. The darkness carried knowledge they did not yet possess. Knowledge that would change their lives forever. Meanwhile, the man responsible continued moving through the shadows. Armed. Determined. Elusive. Every passing minute increased the scale of the operation unfolding around him. Additional officers poured into the area. Command posts were established. Perimeters expanded. Search teams coordinated movements. Yet despite overwhelming effort, the gunman remained free. It was as if the night itself had swallowed him. The contrast was difficult to ignore. An entire law enforcement apparatus mobilized against one man. And still that one man managed to stay ahead. Residents watched from behind locked doors as flashing emergency lights painted neighborhoods in alternating shades of red and blue. The colors reflected off windows. Off parked vehicles. Off empty streets. The city felt transformed. Not into a war zone exactly. Something stranger. A familiar place rendered unfamiliar by fear. Every sound became significant. Every movement demanded attention. Every rumor carried weight. Hours passed. The search continued. The uncertainty deepened. And across Canada, millions would soon wake to headlines describing an event almost unimaginable in a country known more for peace than violence. A city under lockdown. Police officers dead. A gunman still at large. A manhunt growing larger by the hour. The story would dominate national attention. Questions would emerge immediately. Who was the shooter? Why had he done it? Could the attack have been prevented? What failures allowed the tragedy to unfold? Those questions would eventually be answered. Some answers would come from investigators. Others from court proceedings. Others from painful internal reviews. But on that night, none of those answers existed. There was only confusion. Only fear. Only the sound of police radios cutting through the darkness. And somewhere beyond the reach of flashing lights, a young man carrying a rifle continued moving through the night, unaware that his name was about to become permanently linked to one of the darkest chapters in modern Canadian criminal history. The city of Moncton had gone to sleep expecting an ordinary summer night. Instead, it had become the setting for a tragedy that would leave scars long after the gunfire stopped. And this was only the beginning. To understand how the events of June 4, 2014 unfolded, it is necessary to step away from the flashing police lights, the emergency broadcasts, and the headlines that would soon spread across Canada. Before the gunfire, before the manhunt, before the fear settled over an entire city, there was Moncton. At first glance, Moncton did not seem like the kind of place destined to become the backdrop for a national tragedy. Located in the province of New Brunswick, Moncton was known as a hard-working city surrounded by forests, rivers, and rolling landscapes that stretched for miles beyond its urban boundaries. It was not Canada's largest city. It was not its most famous. For many people outside Atlantic Canada, Moncton barely registered in their minds. But for the people who lived there, it was home. The city carried a quiet identity. It was a place where neighbors often recognized one another by name. A place where people waved from driveways. A place where children rode bicycles along residential streets while parents watched from front porches. Life moved at a different pace than in Toronto, Vancouver, or Montreal. There was less noise. Less congestion. Less urgency. Many families had lived in the region for generations. Others had moved there seeking a safer and more affordable life. Small businesses lined local streets. Community events drew large crowds. Hockey games filled arenas during winter months. Summer brought festivals, outdoor gatherings, and evenings that seemed to last forever beneath the fading Atlantic sunlight. People generally felt safe. Not perfectly safe. No city is ever completely free from crime. But Moncton enjoyed a reputation for stability. The kind of place where violent crime felt distant. The kind of place where most residents believed the worst things happened somewhere else. That sense of security was especially strong in the northern sections of the city. The neighborhoods where the shooting would eventually occur were largely residential. Rows of homes sat along winding streets. Small wooded areas separated developments. Backyards merged into patches of forest. Quiet roads connected schools, parks, and shopping centers. To an outsider, the landscape appeared peaceful. Yet hidden within that peacefulness was a characteristic that would later become critically important. The terrain offered countless places to disappear. Trees. Brush. Wooded pathways. Open spaces interrupted by shadows. A person familiar with the area could move between neighborhoods without always being visible. What seemed charming during daylight could become disorienting after dark. And on the night of June 4th, darkness would become an ally. During the weeks leading up to the attack, life in Moncton followed its normal routines. Students prepared for summer break. Parents balanced work schedules and family obligations. Businesses operated as usual. Nothing suggested that the city was approaching a moment that would forever divide its history into before and after. Yet while Moncton continued its ordinary rhythm, another story was unfolding quietly beneath the surface. A story centered around a young man whose worldview had been changing for years. Justin Bourque was born into a world that appeared ordinary enough. Those who knew him often described him as intelligent, thoughtful, and at times socially withdrawn. He was not a notorious criminal. He was not someone whose name frequently appeared in police reports. In many ways, he seemed unremarkable. And that is often what makes cases like this so unsettling. The path toward violence rarely announces itself clearly. It develops gradually. A collection of frustrations. A growing sense of alienation. Ideas that harden into beliefs. Beliefs that eventually become obsessions. By his early 20s, Bourque had developed a deep distrust of government institutions. What began as skepticism appeared to evolve into something much more intense. He consumed information that reinforced his growing conviction that governments had become oppressive forces. Authority figures increasingly occupied a central role in his anger. The world, in his mind, was becoming divided between those who controlled power and those who suffered under it. As years passed, those beliefs deepened. Friends and acquaintances would later describe conversations in which he expressed hostility toward government systems and law enforcement. Not necessarily in ways that immediately signaled violence, but enough that people remembered them after the shooting. Like pieces of a puzzle that only made sense once the picture was complete. Psychologically, this transformation is often difficult to recognize in real time. Many people hold strong political opinions. Many distrust governments. Many criticize institutions. The overwhelming majority never become violent. The danger emerges when ideology combines with isolation, resentment, and a growing belief that violence is justified. Somewhere along the way, Bourque appears to have crossed that line. Not publicly. Not dramatically. But internally. The process likely unfolded in silence. A thought entertained. A grievance repeated. An enemy identified. A fantasy revisited. Over and over until it no longer felt like fantasy. Meanwhile, outside his private world, Moncton remained unaware. The city's police officers certainly were. For the RCMP members serving the region, June 4th began like countless other workdays. Officers attended briefings, reviewed assignments, answered calls, conducted traffic stops, responded to complaints, checked on residents, completed paperwork. The routines of policing are often surprisingly ordinary. Hours can pass without significant incident. Then suddenly everything changes. The officers who would eventually become central figures in this tragedy woke that morning expecting another shift. They expected to return home afterward. That expectation was entirely reasonable. Canada was not a nation accustomed to frequent attacks on police officers. Certainly not attacks of this scale. Certainly not the kind of coordinated violence that would soon erupt in Moncton. Among those serving that day were experienced officers who had spent years protecting their communities. They had families, children, spouses, parents, friends, personal dreams and future plans. Like all human beings, their identities extended far beyond their uniforms. Yet uniforms have a way of simplifying people in the public imagination. A badge becomes the whole story. The person underneath becomes invisible. One of the lasting tragedies of June 4th is that many Canadians first learned the names of these officers only after they died. Before that night, they were simply doing their jobs. Helping motorists. Responding to calls. Serving their communities. Living ordinary lives. As evening approached, Moncton settled into the calm atmosphere of early summer. The weather was mild. The daylight lingered. Families gathered for dinner. Teenagers spent time outdoors. Neighbors chatted across fences. The city looked exactly as it had the day before. And the week before. And the month before. There were no visible signs that history was about to change. The most frightening tragedies often arrive this way. Without warning. Without spectacle. Without obvious signals. A normal evening becomes the last normal evening. A routine day becomes the final day before everything changes. As the sun slowly descended toward the horizon, long shadows stretched across lawns and sidewalks. The streets of North Moncton became quieter. Workers returned home. Traffic thinned. The city began transitioning from day to night. For most residents, it was a beautiful evening. For a small number of people, however, entirely different plans were unfolding. Somewhere in the city, Justin Bourque was preparing himself. Not emotionally. Not impulsively. His later statements suggested something more deliberate. Something considered. Something he believed carried symbolic significance. In his mind, law enforcement officers represented the physical embodiment of a system he had come to despise. The badge became a target. The uniform became a target. The individual wearing either no longer mattered. This is one of the most disturbing aspects of ideological violence. People stop seeing human beings. They begin seeing symbols. Representatives. Enemies. Concepts. And once that transformation occurs, empathy becomes easier to silence. The consequences can be catastrophic. As twilight approached, the distance between Bourque's private grievances and public violence was shrinking. Every minute brought him closer to action. Closer to confrontation. Closer to the moment when thoughts would become reality. Yet nobody around him could fully appreciate the significance of what was about to happen. Residents preparing dinner had no idea. Children playing outside had no idea. Police officers beginning evening patrols had no idea. The city itself had no idea. Moncton existed in a brief moment of innocence. A final stretch of normality suspended between past and future. Soon, emergency sirens would tear through the silence. News helicopters would circle overhead. National media organizations would descend upon the city. Investigators would analyze every decision, every movement, every missed warning sign. But none of that had happened yet. The neighborhoods remained peaceful. The streets remained quiet. The evening air remained calm. And somewhere within that calm, unseen by almost everyone around him, a 24-year-old man was carrying a set of beliefs, grievances, and intentions that would soon collide with reality in the most devastating way imaginable. The stage was set. The city did not know it. The future victims did not know it. Even the officers who would soon answer the first emergency calls did not know it. But history was already moving toward them. And with every passing minute, the distance between ordinary life and extraordinary tragedy grew smaller. In many true crime stories, attention naturally gravitates toward the offender. People want to understand what happened inside the mind of the person who pulled the trigger. They search for motives, warning signs, psychological explanations, and turning points. Entire documentaries are often built around the individual responsible for the violence. But there is a danger in that approach. The more attention given to the perpetrator, the easier it becomes to forget the people whose lives were stolen. The Moncton shootings were not ultimately about Justin Bourque. They were about the human beings who never came home. They were about empty chairs at family tables. Unanswered phone calls. Birthdays that would arrive without fathers. Anniversaries marked by absence. A future abruptly cut away from the people who expected to live it. Before they became names in newspaper headlines, before memorial ceremonies and public tributes, the victims of June 4th were ordinary men living ordinary lives. They were husbands, fathers, sons, friends, co-workers, neighbors. The uniform they wore represented only one part of who they were. To understand the tragedy that unfolded in Moncton, it is important to understand the people behind the badges. One of those men was David Ross. Those who knew him often remembered his calm nature and quiet professionalism. He was not the loudest person in a room. He did not seek attention. Yet people consistently described him as dependable. The kind of person others trusted. The kind of person who showed up when he was needed. In law enforcement, trust is everything. Police officers spend countless hours relying on one another in unpredictable situations. They depend on partners who remain composed under pressure. They rely on colleagues who can be counted on when circumstances suddenly become dangerous. David Ross earned that trust. Years of service had shaped him into an experienced RCMP member. He understood the demands of policing. He understood the risks. Yet, like most officers, he also understood something equally important. Most days ended safely. Most shifts ended with officers returning home. The danger existed, but it was not constant. Life continued. Families were raised. Plans were made. Dreams survived alongside responsibility. Outside of work, David was far more than an officer. He was a family man. Someone whose life extended beyond police radios and patrol vehicles. Someone whose loved ones knew him not as a uniform, but as a person. A voice. A smile. A familiar presence in daily life. The loss of a police officer often becomes public because of the nature of the profession. The loss experienced by the family remains deeply personal. While communities mourn collectively, families grieve individually. Every memory becomes precious. Every photograph gains new meaning. Every ordinary moment becomes irreplaceable. Another officer whose life would be taken that night was Fabrice Gavordin. Originally from France, Fabrice carried a story that reflected both determination and courage. Building a career in law enforcement is demanding under any circumstances. Doing so while adapting to a new country requires even greater resilience. Those who knew him described a man dedicated to both his profession and his family. He possessed a reputation for kindness. Not weakness. Kindness. The two are often confused. The strongest people are frequently those who treat others with respect despite carrying immense responsibility. Friends remembered his sense of humor. Co-workers remembered his professionalism. Family members remembered the man behind the badge. Like many officers, Fabrice balanced two worlds. One world involved responding to emergencies, investigating incidents, protecting communities. The other involved everyday family life. Meals, conversations, future plans. Small moments that seem insignificant until they disappear forever. When tragedy strikes suddenly, people often find themselves replaying those final ordinary interactions. The last goodbye. The final text message. The brief conversation that seemed routine at the time. No one ever expects an ordinary goodbye to become permanent. No one wakes up believing they are speaking to a loved one for the final time. That reality would soon confront the people who loved Fabrice. The third officer killed during the attack was Douglas Larche. Among colleagues, Douglas was respected as both an officer and a person. The RCMP, like many law enforcement organizations, develops a strong sense of community among its members. Long shifts. Shared experiences. Exposure to danger. These realities create bonds that extend beyond professional relationships. Officers become friends. Friends become extended family. The loss of one officer affects entire detachments. The loss of three creates wounds that may never fully heal. Douglas was part of that family. A man with his own history, his own aspirations, his own place within the lives of people who cared about him. One of the cruelest aspects of violence is its indifference to individual stories. Bullets do not recognize birthdays. They do not recognize family photographs. They do not recognize plans waiting to be fulfilled. The future can disappear in seconds. Everything a person has built over decades can suddenly become memory. By the evening of June 4th, none of these men knew their names would soon be spoken across the country. None of them knew memorial services awaited. None of them knew thousands of Canadians would gather to honor their sacrifice. They were simply working. Responding to calls. Performing duties they had performed countless times before. That normality matters. Because tragedy often appears dramatic when viewed from a distance. In reality, it usually interrupts ordinary moments. A person drinking coffee before work. A parent helping a child with homework. An officer beginning a routine shift. The extraordinary arrives disguised as the ordinary. The two surviving officers who suffered serious injuries also became part of the tragedy's lasting legacy. Although they survived, survival does not erase trauma. Physical wounds heal at different rates. Psychological wounds follow their own timelines. Sometimes they remain for life. The public often measures tragedy through death tolls. Those who endure violence understand a more complicated reality. Survival can carry its own burdens. Memories. Questions. Images that refuse to disappear. The knowledge that others did not come home. For the officers involved in the Moncton attack, the emotional consequences extended far beyond the events of a single night. Every law enforcement officer who responded carried pieces of that experience forward. Every dispatcher listening to frantic radio transmissions carried pieces of that experience forward. Every family member touched by the tragedy carried pieces of it forward. Violence rarely affects only its direct victims. Its impact spreads outward. Family to family. Friend to friend. Community to community. Like ripples moving across water long after the initial disturbance. What makes the Moncton shootings particularly heartbreaking is the contrast between the victims and the ideology that targeted them. The officers who died were not abstract symbols. They were not political concepts. They were not representatives of some distant institution. They were human beings. Men who laughed. Men who worried. Men who loved. Men who carried responsibilities far beyond their professional identities. Yet ideological violence often strips away that humanity. The target becomes symbolic. The individual disappears behind the uniform. That transformation allows violence to occur. The humanity of the victim must first be ignored. The reality of their family must first be forgotten. Their personal story must first become invisible. But after the shooting, those stories returned with devastating force. Canadians learned about the lives that had been lost. They saw photographs, read tributes, heard family members speak. The victims ceased being statistics. They became real. Painfully real. Across Moncton, grief settled heavily over the community. Flags lowered. Memorials appeared. Flowers accumulated. Candles flickered. People who had never met the officers found themselves mourning. Not because they personally knew them, but because they recognized something universal. The victims represented people who left home expecting to return. People who accepted risk in service of others. People whose lives ended because they answered a call for help. As news spread across Canada, law enforcement agencies from coast to coast reacted with shock. Police officers understand danger. They train for it. Prepare for it. Accept it as part of the profession. Even so, events like Moncton strike deeply. Because every officer can imagine themselves in that situation. Every family can imagine receiving that phone call. Every detachment can imagine facing that loss. The tragedy transcended geography. It became personal for thousands of people who had never set foot in Moncton. In the days that followed, stories emerged about the victims' dedication and character. Co-workers shared memories. Friends recalled conversations. Families spoke about the men they loved. These stories revealed something important. The victims were remembered not primarily for how they died. They were remembered for how they lived. For their integrity. For their commitment. For the relationships they built throughout their lives. Death may have introduced their names to the broader public. Life was what gave those names meaning. That distinction matters. Because true justice begins with remembering the victims as complete human beings rather than simply casualties of a crime. Long before the investigation reached its conclusions, long before court proceedings began, and long before the nation debated the lessons of Moncton, there were families facing a reality that no investigation could reverse. 3 loved ones were gone. No arrest could change that. No sentence could change that. No explanation could change that. The future they had expected no longer existed. And while the city struggled to understand how such violence had occurred, the families of David Ross, Fabrice Gavorden, and Douglas Larche faced a far more painful challenge: learning how to continue living after the unthinkable. The story of the Moncton shootings is often remembered through gunfire, police tactics, and the manhunt that followed. But at its heart lies something far simpler and far sadder. 3 men left home to do their jobs. 3 families expected them back. And by the end of the night, those expectations had been shattered forever. Everything that followed, the investigation, the trial, the headlines, the public attention, would grow from that single devastating reality. The victims were no longer merely part of the story. They had become its most important chapter. The final hours before the attack did not look extraordinary. No alarms sounded across Moncton. No emergency broadcasts warned residents to stay indoors. No police commanders anticipated that they were about to face one of the most devastating attacks on law enforcement in modern Canadian history. The city remained suspended in the comfortable routine of an early June evening. People prepared dinner. Children played outside. Televisions flickered behind living room curtains. The daylight that lingered over New Brunswick's spring landscape began its slow retreat toward dusk. And somewhere in the north end of Moncton, a young man dressed in camouflage was moving quietly through the neighborhood. Justin Bourque did not appear rushed. Witnesses would later recall something unsettling about his demeanor. He seemed calm, focused, almost detached. There was no frantic energy in his movements. No visible hesitation. No signs of panic. He carried himself like someone who had already made peace with what he intended to do. That calmness would become one of the most chilling details in the entire case. Violence is often associated with rage, with shouting, with emotional outbursts. But some of the most terrifying acts of violence occur in silence. They unfold not through uncontrolled emotion but through deliberate action. As Bourque moved through the neighborhood, residents began noticing him. The sight immediately felt wrong. This was not hunting season. This was not a remote wilderness area. This was a residential community. Families lived here. Children rode bicycles here. People walked their dogs here. And now a heavily armed man dressed in military-style clothing was walking openly through the streets. Concern quickly spread. Phone calls began reaching emergency dispatchers. Residents described what they were seeing. An armed man. Camouflage clothing. Weapons visible. Walking through the neighborhood. Dispatchers treated the reports seriously. Police officers were assigned to investigate. At that moment, the situation still appeared manageable. Potentially dangerous. But manageable. Law enforcement officers respond to armed person complaints regularly. Most conclude without bloodshed. The assumption is usually that communication remains possible. That the situation can be de-escalated. That reason can prevail. Nobody yet understood that Bourque was not looking for a conversation. He was looking for targets. As RCMP officers began moving into the area, the atmosphere shifted. What had been a routine response gradually transformed into something more uncertain. Reports continued arriving. Witnesses described the suspect changing locations. Officers attempted to determine his position. The neighborhoods of North Moncton created challenges. Roads curved through residential developments. Wooded areas interrupted sightlines. Fences and structures limited visibility. Every minute increased the complexity of the search. The officers entering the area could not know they were stepping into an environment the shooter had already begun to exploit. As daylight continued fading, shadows lengthened across yards and streets. Visibility became increasingly difficult. The advantages slowly shifted toward the individual hiding among the terrain. At approximately 7:46 p.m., everything changed. The first gunshots shattered the evening. The sound cut through the neighborhood with shocking violence. For a brief moment, confusion followed. Some residents did not immediately recognize the sound. Others understood instantly. Gunfire carries a distinct quality, a sharpness, a finality, a sound that demands attention. Then more shots followed. The uncertainty vanished. Something catastrophic was happening. Officers searching for Bork suddenly found themselves under attack. The man they were trying to locate had opened fire. What followed unfolded rapidly. Confusion dominated the scene. Information moved through radio channels in fragments. Officers attempted to identify the shooter's location, determine the direction of fire, locate wounded colleagues, protect civilians, request reinforcements, all while confronting a threat that remained difficult to see. The environment itself became part of the danger. Trees concealed movement. Darkness obscured positions. Residential structures created blind spots. The gunman possessed mobility. The officers possessed responsibility. They could not simply withdraw. There were fellow officers in danger. There were residents nearby. There were lives at stake. Witnesses later described hearing multiple rounds echoing through the neighborhood. The sounds traveled across backyards and between houses. Residents dropped to floors, pulled children away from windows, locked doors, turned off lights. Many had no idea exactly what was happening. Only that gunfire was erupting outside. Only that police vehicles were racing through the streets. Only that fear had suddenly entered their community. For the officers at the scene, the situation deteriorated with terrifying speed. The attack was not random. The shooter was targeting police. Every movement carried risk. Every attempt to locate him exposed officers to further danger. In those critical moments, law enforcement personnel faced an impossible challenge. They needed to stop the attacker. But first they had to find him. And he understood that. Bork had selected a battlefield that favored concealment. As darkness deepened, the advantage became even more pronounced. The neighborhood transformed into a maze of shadows. Every tree line seemed threatening. Every patch of darkness concealed possibilities. The officers were forced to make decisions with incomplete information. The kind of decisions that define life-and-death situations. The kind of decisions later examined in investigations and reports. But in the moment, there is no pause button. No opportunity to review options. Only action. Only instinct. Only survival. At some point during the violence, 3 RCMP officers suffered fatal injuries. David Ross, Fabrice Gavorden, Douglas Larche. The details of their final moments remain among the most painful aspects of the tragedy. What is known is that they were responding to a call, attempting to confront a dangerous suspect, fulfilling responsibilities they had accepted when they chose careers in law enforcement. Then, in a matter of seconds, everything changed. Lives that had taken decades to build ended abruptly. Families who expected ordinary evenings unknowingly entered the worst night of their lives. The attack also left 2 additional officers seriously wounded. They survived. But survival came at tremendous cost. Physical injuries required treatment. Emotional wounds would linger long after the gunfire ended. For those caught in the attack, the event would never truly become part of the past. Certain nights remain permanently present. Certain memories refuse to fade. As the shooting continued, radio communications reflected the growing chaos. Calls for assistance intensified. Additional units rushed toward the area. Officers attempted to establish positions. Coordinate responses. Locate casualties. Contain the threat. Every new piece of information seemed to generate additional questions. Where was the shooter? How many weapons did he possess? Was he acting alone? Would he attack again? No one could answer with certainty. And uncertainty is one of the most dangerous elements in any active shooting situation. The inability to predict the next move creates paralysis. Every possibility must be considered. Every scenario remains open. Meanwhile, throughout Moncton, rumors spread rapidly. Social media accelerated confusion. Residents exchanged messages. Family members called one another. News organizations began receiving reports. Information moved faster than verification. People searched for answers that did not yet exist. Many initially assumed the violence would end quickly. Most active shooting incidents are resolved within relatively short periods. This one would prove different. The attacker disappeared into the darkness. The shooting itself had lasted only a limited period of time. But its consequences were just beginning. By the time authorities understood the scale of the tragedy, the suspect was gone. Somewhere within the surrounding area. Somewhere armed. Somewhere capable of striking again. That realization transformed an active shooting scene into something even larger. A manhunt. And not just any manhunt. One involving an individual who had already demonstrated both intent and capability. An individual willing to target police officers directly. An individual whose next move remained unknown. For the people of Moncton, fear expanded beyond the original crime scene. The danger was no longer confined to one location. The shooter had vanished. That meant uncertainty spread everywhere. Residents looked out darkened windows, wondering whether he might be nearby. Wondering whether another confrontation was imminent. Wondering whether their neighborhood would become the next scene of violence. Inside command centers, law enforcement leaders faced difficult realities. 3 officers were dead. 2 more were injured. The suspect remained at large. Nightfall was providing concealment. The city required protection. Resources had to be mobilized immediately. The scope of the operation expanded rapidly. Additional personnel were requested. Tactical teams prepared for deployment. Perimeters were established. Search plans were developed. Every available asset became valuable. The urgency was undeniable. But beneath the tactical decisions and operational planning lay a profound emotional impact. The RCMP was not merely responding to a criminal incident. The RCMP was responding to the deaths of its own officers, colleagues, friends, members of the same professional family. That reality carried enormous weight. Many responding officers personally knew the victims. Some had worked alongside them for years. Others had trained with them, shared shifts with them, built friendships with them. The grief had already begun even as the search continued. And yet there was no time to process it. The suspect was still free. Duty demanded focus. Duty demanded action. Duty demanded movement. Hours later, residents would remember the atmosphere that settled over Moncton after the shooting. The silence. The uncertainty. The strange feeling that something fundamental had changed. The city that existed that afternoon no longer existed that night. Fear had replaced normality. Questions had replaced certainty. And somewhere beyond the reach of police searchlights, Justin Bourque remained hidden. The attack itself had ended. Its consequences had not. The shooting had lasted minutes. The impact would last decades. Families had already entered a nightmare from which they would never fully awaken. A community had suffered a wound that would leave permanent scars. And law enforcement officers across Canada were beginning to realize that one of the darkest chapters in their profession's history had just begun. The gunfire had stopped. But the story was far from over. In many ways, it was only entering its most dangerous phase. The gunfire had ended, but the nightmare had only begun. In many criminal investigations, there is a moment when chaos gives way to clarity. Investigators arrive. A crime scene is secured. Evidence is collected. Witnesses are interviewed. The story begins to reveal itself piece by piece. Moncton would not be one of those cases. On the night of June 4, 2014, there was no immediate clarity. There was only uncertainty. The shooter was still free. 3 RCMP officers were dead. 2 more were seriously wounded. And somewhere beyond the police perimeter, an armed man was moving through the darkness. That single fact changed everything. Ordinarily, investigators entering a homicide scene can focus entirely on the victims and the evidence left behind. In Moncton, officers had to balance two priorities at once. They needed to understand what had happened. And they needed to stop it from happening again. The crime scene itself stretched across multiple locations. This was not a single room. Not a single house. Not a single isolated area. The violence had unfolded across a residential neighborhood, creating a complex and dangerous environment for investigators. Police vehicles sat abandoned in positions where officers had attempted to respond. Emergency lights flashed against houses and trees. Roadways became restricted zones. Yellow tape appeared beneath streetlights. The quiet suburban landscape had transformed into a sprawling crime scene. For residents who looked outside their windows that night, the sight felt surreal. Many had lived in the neighborhood for years. Some had raised families there. Others had chosen the area precisely because it felt peaceful. Now tactical officers moved through streets carrying rifles. Emergency personnel rushed between secured areas. Search teams worked methodically beneath the darkness. The familiar suddenly felt foreign. Fear lingered in every shadow. At first, authorities focused on saving lives. Medical personnel worked under extraordinary pressure. The wounded officers required immediate treatment. Every second mattered. Every decision mattered. The difference between life and death often depends upon moments. Behind every emergency response lies a race against time invisible to most observers. The public sees ambulances. The flashing lights. The arrival at hospitals. What they do not see are the calculations happening in real time. The urgency. The determination. The desperate effort to preserve life. For 2 officers, those efforts succeeded. For 3 others, the damage proved fatal. As confirmation of the deaths spread through law enforcement channels, the emotional weight of the tragedy became impossible to ignore. Some officers received the news over radios. Others through direct communication. Some learned in fragments. Others heard the full reality immediately. No matter how the information arrived, the result was the same. Shock. Grief. Disbelief. Police officers train for dangerous situations. They understand risk. But understanding risk does not diminish the pain when colleagues are lost. Particularly colleagues known personally. Particularly colleagues with whom countless hours had been shared. While those emotions spread through the RCMP, investigators faced an immediate challenge. The shooter had vanished. No suspect stood in custody. No weapon had been recovered. No interrogation could begin. The man responsible remained somewhere within reach of the city. Armed. Dangerous. Unpredictable. That uncertainty transformed the entire investigation. The first task became reconstruction. Investigators needed to understand the sequence of events. Where had officers first encountered the suspect? Where had shots been fired? How had the confrontation unfolded? Which positions had been occupied by officers? What routes had the suspect used? Each question mattered. Every answer could help predict his future behavior. Every answer could potentially save lives. The physical evidence began telling part of the story. Spent shell casings. Impact marks. Vehicle positions. Witness observations. Fragments of information scattered throughout the neighborhood. Each detail represented a piece of a larger puzzle. But the puzzle remained incomplete. The most important piece was still missing. The suspect himself. Throughout the night, residents became unwilling participants in the investigation. Witnesses emerged cautiously. Some had seen the armed man before the shooting. Others had heard gunfire. Many had observed police activity from inside their homes. Fear shaped every conversation. People understood that the shooter remained at large. The possibility of another attack felt very real. Even providing information carried emotional weight. Investigators listened carefully. Compared statements. Cross-referenced timelines. Attempted to separate fact from rumor. In major incidents, misinformation spreads almost as quickly as the event itself. People unintentionally misremember details. Others repeat second-hand information. Social media amplifies uncertainty. Part of the investigative process involves filtering noise from truth. That process was already underway. Yet one reality remained unavoidable. The attack appeared deliberate. Nothing about the evidence suggested spontaneous violence. The suspect had arrived armed. He had selected police officers as targets. He had demonstrated planning. Those conclusions would shape the direction of the investigation moving forward. As midnight approached, the operation expanded dramatically. Law enforcement resources poured into Moncton. Officers arrived from surrounding regions. Specialized units became involved. Command centers coordinated information. Search efforts intensified. The scale reflected the seriousness of the threat. This was no longer merely a homicide investigation. It was an active hunt for a suspected cop killer. Across Canada, media coverage intensified. News organizations interrupted programming. Journalists scrambled to gather information. Images of police vehicles and secured neighborhoods appeared on television screens nationwide. Canadians woke to headlines describing a city under siege. Yet despite growing public attention, investigators still faced the same central problem. They did not know exactly where Justin Bourque was. Some reports suggested he remained nearby. Others proposed he had escaped the area. Every possibility required consideration. Every lead demanded attention. The uncertainty stretched into the early hours. Meanwhile, another painful process unfolded away from cameras and crime scenes. The notification of families. There are few duties more difficult in law enforcement than informing loved ones that someone will never return home. No training fully prepares a person for that conversation. No amount of experience removes its emotional weight. Somewhere, doors were knocked upon. Phones rang. Lives changed forever. The families of David Ross, Fabrice Gavorden, and Douglas Larche entered a reality they had never imagined. Hours earlier, these men had simply gone to work. Now they were gone. The transition from normal life to unimaginable loss occurred in a matter of moments. For investigators, however, the work continued. The search for answers could not wait. The search for the suspect could not wait. The city remained vulnerable. Throughout the following hours, forensic teams continued documenting evidence. Crime scenes require precision. Every detail matters. Photographs capture positions. Measurements preserve relationships. Physical evidence creates timelines. Investigators understand that memory can fade. Evidence cannot be allowed to disappear. The process often appears methodical from the outside. Almost clinical. Yet beneath that professionalism lies a deeper awareness. Each piece of evidence represents part of a human tragedy. Every photograph documents a moment someone lost their life. Every measurement exists because violence occurred. The science of investigation is inseparable from the humanity of the crime. As dawn approached on June 5th, Moncton awoke to a city transformed. Schools faced closures. Businesses adjusted operations. Residents received instructions to remain vigilant. The atmosphere felt unlike anything many had ever experienced. Police presence remained everywhere. Roadblocks appeared. Search teams continued moving through neighborhoods. The threat remained unresolved. For many residents, sleep had been impossible. Some spent the entire night watching updates. Others remained awake listening for sounds outside. Parents checked locks repeatedly. Curtains stayed closed. The simple act of looking out a window felt different. The community understood that danger still existed. That understanding affected every aspect of daily life. Investigators now possessed a growing profile of the suspect. Witness statements and prior information helped establish who he was. His name. His background. His apparent beliefs. The picture remained incomplete, but it was becoming clearer. This was not someone acting in a moment of uncontrolled emotion. The attack reflected deeper motivations, longer-standing grievances. Questions about those motivations would eventually become central to understanding the case. But at that stage, understanding mattered less than capture. The public wanted answers. Law enforcement wanted justice. Families wanted accountability. All of those goals depended upon finding the man responsible. And still he remained missing. The discovery phase of an investigation often revolves around physical clues. Fingerprints, DNA, footprints, surveillance footage. In Moncton, investigators certainly pursued those forms of evidence. But another discovery was occurring simultaneously. A discovery about vulnerability. A discovery about preparedness. A discovery about how quickly ordinary assumptions could collapse. The attack exposed realities that would later become subjects of intense review. Questions emerged regarding equipment, communication, tactical responses, operational challenges. Those questions would grow louder in the months and years ahead. For the moment, however, they remained secondary. The immediate objective was straightforward. Find Justin Bourque. Prevent further violence. Bring the crisis to an end. As the first full day after the shooting began, investigators stood at the edge of an enormous undertaking. They had a suspect. They had evidence. They had witnesses. But they did not yet have the one thing every major investigation ultimately requires: control. The shooter remained free. The city remained tense. The story remained unfinished. And somewhere beyond the expanding search perimeter, the man at the center of the tragedy was still hiding. The evidence left behind had begun speaking. The victims' stories had begun emerging. The scale of the loss had become painfully clear. But the investigation was only entering its most difficult chapter. Because before justice could be delivered, before questions could be answered, before the nation could begin healing, investigators first had to solve the most urgent mystery of all. Where was Justin Bourque? By the morning of June 5, 2014, the city of Moncton had become something few residents ever imagined it could be. A city under lockdown. The attack itself had lasted only a short time, but its aftermath stretched relentlessly into the hours that followed. Fear lingered over neighborhoods like a heavy fog. Streets that were normally filled with commuters and families now appeared strangely empty. School buses remained parked. Businesses delayed opening. Parents kept children indoors. Some residents stood quietly behind curtains, watching police vehicles move through their neighborhoods. Others avoided windows entirely. The knowledge that an armed gunman remained at large changed the way people viewed even the simplest parts of daily life. Every unfamiliar sound seemed suspicious. Every movement outside attracted attention. Every rumor carried weight. Meanwhile, the largest police operation many residents had ever witnessed was unfolding around them. The hunt for Justin Bourque had become the central focus of law enforcement agencies across the region. What made the search particularly difficult was the nature of the suspect himself. He was not a criminal mastermind. He was not leading a sophisticated organization. Yet he possessed several advantages that made him extraordinarily dangerous. He knew the local terrain. He understood how to move through wooded areas. He was armed. Most importantly, he had already demonstrated a willingness to kill. Those factors transformed the search from a standard fugitive investigation into something much more urgent. Police could not assume he would surrender peacefully. They could not assume he would avoid further violence. Every officer involved understood the stakes. A single mistake could cost additional lives. As command centers coordinated the expanding operation, investigators worked to construct a complete profile of the man they were searching for. The more they understood about Bourque, the greater their chances of predicting his next move. Friends, acquaintances, family members, and individuals who had interacted with him became important sources of information. Investigators wanted answers. What had he been saying before the attack? Had he revealed plans? Had he made threats? Had anyone noticed warning signs? The process of reconstructing a person's life after a violent act is often unsettling. Conversations that once seemed insignificant suddenly gain importance. Comments previously dismissed as frustration or exaggeration acquire darker meanings. Events are re-evaluated through the lens of tragedy. People begin asking themselves difficult questions. Could anyone have seen this coming? Could anyone have stopped it? As information emerged, investigators discovered a pattern of anti-government beliefs and hostility toward authority. Bork's worldview appeared increasingly shaped by resentment. Government institutions occupied a central role in his thinking. Law enforcement officers, in particular, had become symbols of the system he opposed. The distinction between individuals and institutions had gradually disappeared. Instead of seeing officers as human beings, he appeared to see them as representatives of something larger. That psychological shift would become crucial to understanding the attack. Violence against a symbol often becomes easier when the humanity of the individual target is ignored. Investigators were not merely attempting to understand motive. They were attempting to understand mindset. The challenge was that mindset alone would not reveal location. While analysts examined beliefs and behavior, tactical teams continued searching neighborhoods, wooded areas, and potential hiding places. The operation grew larger with each passing hour. More personnel arrived. Specialized resources were deployed. Search patterns expanded. The city increasingly resembled the center of a major national security operation. Residents watched helicopters overhead. Roadblocks appeared. Police presence became nearly impossible to ignore. And still, despite the enormous effort, Justin Bork remained hidden. The uncertainty created tension not only among residents but among investigators themselves. Every lead generated hope. Every dead end created frustration. One report suggested a possible sighting. Teams responded. Nothing. Another tip pointed toward a different location. Again, resources moved. Again, nothing. The search became a battle against both geography and time. Hours passed. The suspect remained free. In major investigations, the public often imagines detectives steadily moving from clue to clue until a suspect is located. Reality is rarely so straightforward. Most investigations involve periods of confusion, contradictions, false leads, incomplete information. Moncton was no exception. The difference was that the consequences of delay felt especially severe. Every hour that passed meant another hour during which an armed suspect remained at large. Every hour prolonged the fear gripping the community. For law enforcement officers, exhaustion gradually became a factor. Many had been working continuously since the shooting began. Adrenaline can sustain people for remarkable periods. Eventually, however, fatigue begins to exert its influence. Decision-making becomes harder. Concentration becomes more difficult. The challenge facing commanders was balancing urgency with effectiveness. The search could not stop. But it had to remain organized. The operation required discipline. As daylight moved across the city, investigators continued gathering information about Bork's activities before the attack. His movements. His interests. His habits. The picture becoming visible was deeply troubling. This did not appear to be an impulsive act. Evidence increasingly suggested preparation. The attack had not emerged from a sudden argument or emotional confrontation. Instead, it appeared rooted in a broader ideological framework that had developed over time. That realization carried significant implications. Planned violence is often more difficult to prevent than spontaneous violence. The preparation occurs privately. The warning signs are subtle. The transformation happens gradually. People around the individual may notice changes without fully appreciating their significance. By the time intentions become obvious, the opportunity for intervention may already have passed. Throughout June 5, investigators analyzed every available piece of information. Witness statements were compared. Timelines were refined. Potential locations were evaluated. Technology played an important role. Communications were monitored. Information flowed continuously between agencies. The search was becoming increasingly sophisticated. Yet despite all those resources, one fundamental reality persisted. The suspect had not been found. The longer the search continued, the more psychological pressure developed. Residents remained confined by uncertainty. Law enforcement personnel remained focused on a threat that could emerge at any moment. Families of the victims faced a uniquely painful experience. Not only were they grieving unimaginable losses, but the man responsible remained free. Justice still felt distant. Closure remained impossible. Even the broader public felt the tension. News coverage expanded nationwide. Canadians followed updates closely. Many found themselves asking how one individual had managed to evade such an extensive search effort. The answer lay partly in the environment. The wooded areas surrounding the neighborhood offered concealment. Darkness had initially worked in the suspect's favor. Knowledge of local geography provided additional advantages. Most importantly, investigators were attempting to locate a single determined individual within a large and complex area. Even massive search operations have limitations. One of the most challenging aspects of the investigation involved separating useful information from overwhelming quantities of data. Major incidents generate enormous numbers of tips. Some are valuable. Many are not. People report suspicious vehicles, suspicious individuals, suspicious sounds. Investigators must evaluate each lead carefully. Ignoring a tip could mean missing the suspect. Pursuing every weak lead could waste critical resources. The balance requires experience and judgment. As evening approached once again, nearly 24 hours had passed since the shooting. The city remained tense. The search continued. The suspect remained elusive. And yet beneath the frustration, investigators began noticing subtle developments. Patterns. Possibilities. Fragments of information that seemed increasingly significant. The operation was not standing still. Progress was being made. Not dramatic progress. Not the kind that produces immediate headlines. But progress nonetheless. Investigators were narrowing possibilities. Eliminating locations. Building a clearer understanding of the suspect's likely behavior. Every hour brought them closer. Even if that progress remained invisible to the public. The emotional atmosphere inside the investigation was complex. There was determination, grief, anger, professional focus. Many officers involved knew the victims personally. The deaths of David Ross, Fabrice Gavorden, and Douglas Larche were not abstract losses. They were deeply personal. Yet professionalism demanded discipline. The search could not become emotional. It had to remain strategic. Every decision needed to be based on evidence rather than frustration. That professionalism became one of the defining features of the operation. The desire for justice remained powerful. The commitment to procedure remained equally powerful. As darkness returned to Moncton on June 5, the city entered another uneasy night. Many residents slept little. Some not at all. People checked news updates repeatedly. Families reassured one another. Doors remained locked. Lights remained on. The knowledge that the suspect was still somewhere nearby continued to weigh heavily on everyone. But unknown to most residents, investigators were moving closer to a breakthrough. The enormous search effort was beginning to tighten. Information gathered over nearly 24 hours was starting to converge. The circle around Justin Bourque was becoming smaller. He had managed to evade capture. He had managed to remain hidden. But no search lasts forever. Eventually, even the most determined fugitive runs out of space. Runs out of options. Runs out of luck. The investigation had endured uncertainty, false leads, and frustration. Yet beneath all of that, momentum was quietly building. And soon, after one of the most intense manhunts in Canadian history, investigators would finally receive the opportunity they had been waiting for. The opportunity to bring the search to an end. The opportunity to confront the man responsible. The opportunity to ensure that no more lives would be lost. The breakthrough was coming. And when it arrived, it would end nearly 28 hours of fear, uncertainty, and relentless pursuit. For nearly 28 hours, Moncton had lived under a cloud of uncertainty. 28 hours of fear. 28 hours of unanswered questions. 28 hours during which one of the most heavily sought individuals in Canada remained hidden somewhere within reach of an entire city. By the evening of June 5th, the search had evolved into something far larger than anyone could have imagined when the first emergency calls arrived. Hundreds of officers had become involved. Specialized tactical units had been deployed. Roadblocks had been established. Residential neighborhoods had been searched repeatedly. Aircraft had scanned from above. Command centers operated around the clock. And still, Justin Bourque remained free. For investigators, the challenge had become both physical and psychological. Finding a suspect is difficult. Finding a suspect who understands the local environment, who is armed, and who has already demonstrated lethal intent is exponentially harder. Yet despite the frustration and exhaustion, one crucial fact remained true. Every hour that passed generated new information. Every search narrowed possibilities. Every eliminated location reduced the space in which Bourque could remain hidden. The public saw uncertainty. Investigators saw a slowly tightening circle. Somewhere inside that shrinking circle was the man they were hunting. As June 5th turned into June 6th, fatigue had become a constant companion for many involved in the operation. Officers had spent long hours moving through neighborhoods, wooded areas, and search zones. Command personnel had been making decisions continuously. Investigators had been analyzing leads without interruption. The human body can function under extraordinary pressure for limited periods of time. But eventually exhaustion begins to seep into every movement, every thought, every decision. The challenge was maintaining focus. Because the final stages of a manhunt can often be the most dangerous. A cornered suspect may become desperate. An exhausted officer may become vulnerable. One mistake can change everything. The city itself seemed trapped in a strange state between wakefulness and sleep. Many residents remained awake long after midnight. Television screens glowed behind curtains. Phones refreshed news updates repeatedly. People waited for answers. The uncertainty had become its own form of stress. No one knew exactly where Bourque was. No one knew whether another confrontation was approaching. No one knew how the story would end. The possibility of further violence lingered over every update. Meanwhile, search teams continued working through darkness. The operation had become methodical, disciplined, persistent. The initial chaos that followed the shooting had long since been replaced by calculated strategy. Investigators had learned valuable lessons during the previous 28 hours. They better understood Bourque's likely movements. They better understood his behavior. They better understood the environment in which he was hiding. Most importantly, they understood that time was no longer working entirely in his favor. Remaining hidden sounds simple in theory. In reality, it is extraordinarily difficult. A fugitive requires shelter, water, food, rest. Every necessity creates opportunities for discovery. Every movement increases risk. Every passing hour introduces new variables. The longer the search continued, the more difficult Bourque's situation became. Investigators understood this. Patience became a weapon. Pressure became a weapon. Persistence became a weapon. Then, slowly, the breakthrough began to emerge. Information reached investigators suggesting a possible location. Like many leads during the manhunt, it required verification. Officers had chased numerous possibilities over the previous day. Some had produced nothing. Others had consumed valuable resources. No one wanted to celebrate prematurely. No one wanted to assume success before confirmation. Yet something about this information felt different. The details aligned with existing intelligence. The circumstances appeared credible. Attention focused on a wooded area near the north end of Moncton. Officers moved carefully. There would be no reckless approach. No unnecessary risks. Everyone involved understood exactly who they were searching for. This was a suspect who had already killed 3 officers. A suspect who possessed firearms. A suspect whose intentions could not be predicted. The search teams advanced with caution. Every movement was deliberate. Every position considered. Every possibility accounted for. Darkness remained present, but investigators now possessed something they had lacked during much of the operation. Direction. The search was no longer spread across endless possibilities. It was beginning to converge. As officers closed in, tension intensified. This was the moment everyone had anticipated. The moment everyone had feared. The possibility of a final confrontation. History is filled with manhunts that end violently. Cornered suspects often choose resistance. Some seek escape. Others seek confrontation. Law enforcement personnel preparing for the encounter had to assume the worst. Preparation demanded it. Complacency could be fatal. The memories of June 4th remained painfully fresh. No one intended to underestimate the danger. Yet what happened next unfolded differently than many expected. In the early hours of June 6th, officers located Justin Bourke. After nearly 28 hours on the run, the man at the center of the tragedy was finally found. The moment carried enormous significance. For residents. For investigators. For the families of the victims. For law enforcement agencies across Canada. The search that had dominated national attention was finally approaching its conclusion. The critical question remained. Would the suspect surrender? Or would there be more bloodshed? Officers approached with extreme caution. Weapons ready. Positions secured. Every movement carefully coordinated. The possibility of gunfire remained real until the very last moment. No one could afford assumptions. Then came the outcome few had dared confidently predict. Bourke surrendered. The arrest occurred without another exchange of gunfire. After all the fear. After all the violence. After all the uncertainty. The manhunt ended not with a final shootout, but with a surrender. The contrast felt almost surreal. For nearly 28 hours, an entire city had feared another attack. Hundreds of officers had prepared for the possibility of another deadly confrontation. Yet when the moment arrived, the violence stopped. Bourke was taken into custody. Alive. The danger that had gripped Moncton finally began to loosen. One of the most remembered details from the arrest involved the words reportedly spoken by Bourke after being captured. A brief statement. Simple. Almost understated. A remark suggesting finality. As though a chapter had closed. For investigators, however, the arrest did not represent an ending. It represented a beginning. Finding the suspect answered one question. Many others remained. Why had he done it? What exactly had motivated the attack? Had anyone known what he intended? Could the tragedy have been prevented? Those questions now became the focus of the investigation. But before answers could emerge, there was a moment of collective relief. The city was safe. The suspect was in custody. No additional officers had been killed during the manhunt. No civilians had been harmed. Considering the circumstances, that outcome mattered enormously. Residents who had spent hours confined to their homes finally began receiving the news. The suspect had been arrested. The threat had ended. The lockdowns would eventually be lifted. The search would eventually conclude. The fear that had dominated daily life for more than a day could finally begin to recede. The reaction was immediate. Relief spread quickly throughout the community. Yet relief existed alongside grief. The capture of Bourke did not erase what had happened. 3 officers remained dead. Families remained devastated. Communities remained wounded. The arrest solved the immediate crisis. It could not reverse the tragedy. For the RCMP, the breakthrough carried particular significance. Many officers involved in the search had been operating under immense emotional pressure. They were pursuing a suspect who had killed members of their own law enforcement family. Professionalism demanded discipline. The arrest validated that discipline. Justice had not yet been delivered, but the process could finally begin. Across Canada, headlines shifted. The focus moved from the search itself to the man responsible. Journalists examined Bourque's background. Investigators explored his beliefs. Analysts attempted to understand the path that had led to violence. The public wanted explanations. The arrest made those explanations possible. Without a suspect in custody, many questions remain theoretical. With a suspect identified and detained, investigators can begin building a complete picture. Yet one of the most striking aspects of the breakthrough was what it revealed about persistence. The manhunt had not been solved through luck alone. It had required coordination, patience, resources, discipline. Hundreds of individuals contributed to the outcome. Officers on the ground, investigators, analysts, command personnel, support staff. The operation reflected the collective effort of an enormous number of people working toward a single objective. By dawn on June 6, Moncton was beginning to emerge from one of the most traumatic experiences in its history. The city was no longer searching. The city was no longer waiting. The city was beginning the difficult process of recovery. Yet recovery would not come quickly. The emotional impact of the shootings would linger. The questions raised by the attack would linger. The memories would linger. Still, the breakthrough marked an important turning point. The uncertainty was over. The fear of another attack was over. The manhunt was over. For 28 hours, Justin Bourque had remained beyond the reach of one of the largest police operations in Canadian history. Now he sat in custody. The balance of power had shifted completely. No longer was the story about pursuit. Now it would become a story about accountability. A story about evidence. A story about motive. A story about justice. And for the families of David Ross, Fabrice Gavorden, and Douglas Larche, it represented the first step toward something they desperately needed. Not closure. Because some losses never truly close. But answers. The man responsible had finally been found. The search had ended. The next chapter was about to begin. When the handcuffs finally closed around Justin Bourque's wrists in the early hours of June 6, 2014, one chapter of the story came to an end. The manhunt was over. The immediate danger had passed. The city of Moncton could finally breathe again. But for the families of the victims, relief was not the same thing as justice. Relief meant the killer could no longer hurt anyone else. Justice required something far more complicated. Justice required answers. Justice required accountability. Justice required confronting the reality of what had happened and placing it before the eyes of an entire nation. In the days following the arrest, investigators continued building the case. Although Bourque had been captured, the legal process was only beginning. Every detail had to be documented. Every piece of evidence had to be examined. Every witness statement had to be verified. The prosecution would need to establish not only what happened but also the intent behind it. Fortunately for investigators, many of the central facts were not in dispute. The shootings had occurred. 3 RCMP officers had been killed. 2 others had been wounded. Witnesses had observed the suspect before the attack. Physical evidence linked him directly to the crime. The challenge was not identifying the perpetrator. The challenge was presenting the complete story in a manner that honored both truth and justice. As news coverage intensified, Canadians sought to understand the man responsible. The question echoed across television programs, newspaper columns, and online discussions. Why? Why would a 24-year-old man decide to wage a one-man attack against police officers? Why would someone living in a relatively peaceful Canadian city choose violence? Why would ideological beliefs evolve into murder? The answers that emerged were deeply unsettling. Investigators concluded that Bork's actions had been driven by a growing hostility toward government authority. Over time, his worldview had become increasingly consumed by anti-government ideas. Police officers had come to represent something larger in his mind. They were no longer individuals. They were symbols. Representatives of a system he believed needed to be challenged. This distinction became critical. The officers killed in Moncton had never personally wronged him. There had been no ongoing dispute. No personal vendetta. No history of direct conflict. The attack was ideological. The victims were targeted because of what their uniforms represented. That reality made the crime particularly disturbing. When violence becomes disconnected from personal relationships, almost anyone fitting a certain category can become a target. The danger expands beyond individual grievances. It becomes symbolic. And symbolic violence often carries wider consequences. As investigators continued examining Bork's background, they found evidence that his beliefs had not appeared overnight. The process had been gradual. A slow evolution of resentment and distrust. Like many cases involving ideological extremism, there was no single turning point. No single event that explained everything. Instead, there appeared to be a steady accumulation of grievances that eventually merged with violent thinking. The legal system, however, focuses not on abstract philosophy but on criminal responsibility. Whatever beliefs Bork held, the facts remained undeniable. 3 officers were dead. 2 others had suffered serious injuries. The law demanded accountability. When court proceedings approached, public interest remained intense. Canadians followed developments closely. The attack had touched a nerve throughout the country. It challenged assumptions about safety. It challenged assumptions about violence. It challenged assumptions about the risks faced by law enforcement officers. Many people expected a lengthy and emotionally charged trial. A dramatic courtroom battle. Weeks of testimony. Competing narratives. Yet the case would take a different path. In August 2014, only a few months after the shootings, Justin Bork entered guilty pleas. He admitted responsibility. He pleaded guilty to 3 counts of first-degree murder. He pleaded guilty to 2 counts of attempted murder. The decision eliminated any uncertainty regarding culpability. There would be no dispute over who carried out the attack. There would be no effort to shift blame elsewhere. The admissions removed many legal questions. But they did not remove the emotional impact. Courtrooms are often described as places of law. They are also places of grief. Behind every criminal proceeding involving homicide stand families whose lives have been permanently altered. For them, the courtroom is not merely a legal venue. It is the place where unimaginable loss is publicly acknowledged. The place where names become more than evidence. The place where human consequences become impossible to ignore. As proceedings unfolded, family members of the victims faced one of the most difficult experiences imaginable. Listening. Remembering. Reliving. The justice system requires facts. Facts often reopen wounds. Every description of the attack carries memories. Every discussion of evidence carries pain. Yet many families endure the process because accountability matters. Truth matters. Recognition matters. One of the most powerful elements of sentencing hearings in cases involving homicide is the opportunity for victim impact statements. These statements provide families and loved ones with a voice. A chance to explain what the loss has meant. A chance to describe the human cost that statistics cannot capture. Because homicide investigations often become consumed by details. Timelines. Weapons. Forensic evidence. Legal arguments. Victim impact statements restore humanity to the center of the conversation. They remind everyone present that the crime was not merely a violation of law. It was a violation of lives. Lives interconnected with countless others. Lives that can never be replaced. The sentencing phase also provided insight into Bourque's own perspective. His statements reflected the anti-government beliefs investigators had already identified. He described a worldview shaped by distrust of authority. A worldview in which violence had become, in his mind, a form of resistance. Understanding that mindset did not excuse the crime. Nor did it lessen responsibility. But it offered a glimpse into the psychological framework that had produced the attack. For many observers, those explanations felt deeply unsatisfying. Because there is often a gap between explanation and understanding. People may learn why something happened without ever truly comprehending it. The deaths of David Ross, Fabrice Gavorden, and Douglas Larche remained difficult to reconcile with any ideological justification. No theory could restore their lives. No political grievance could justify their loss. No belief system could erase the suffering experienced by their families. Eventually, the court delivered its sentence. Justin Bourque received life imprisonment. He would not be eligible for parole for at least 25 years. The sentence reflected the extraordinary seriousness of the crimes. 3 murders. 2 attempted murders. A deliberate attack on law enforcement officers. The punishment represented one of the harshest available outcomes under Canadian law. For some observers, the sentence felt appropriate. For others, no sentence could ever feel sufficient. That tension exists in many homicide cases. The justice system can punish offenders. It cannot restore victims. It can impose consequences. It cannot reverse tragedy. The difference between justice and healing is important. Justice operates through courts. Healing operates through time. One has formal procedures. The other has none. After sentencing, many Canadians naturally viewed the case as concluded. The killer had been arrested. The evidence had been presented. The sentence had been imposed. The legal process had reached its destination. Yet for those closest to the tragedy, the story did not end there. Families continued grieving. Children continued growing up without fathers. Friends continued carrying memories. Co-workers continued feeling the absence of men who should have been beside them. Legal closure and emotional closure are rarely the same thing. The Moncton case also prompted broader conversations about policing and public safety. Questions emerged regarding tactical preparedness, equipment, training, communication systems. Investigations into the response sought to identify lessons that might prevent similar tragedies in the future. Those reviews were not attempts to assign blame for the attack itself. Responsibility rested with the shooter. Rather, they reflected a commitment to learning from tragedy. Every major incident offers lessons. The challenge is recognizing them before history repeats itself. The deaths of the 3 officers carried a legacy beyond the courtroom. Their sacrifice influenced discussions about officer safety across Canada. Policies were examined. Practices were reviewed. Recommendations were developed. In that sense, the pursuit of justice extended beyond sentencing. It included efforts to protect future officers, to reduce future risks, to ensure that lives lost would not be forgotten. As months turned into years, the legal chapter of the Moncton shootings became part of Canadian criminal history. The case entered textbooks, reports, and training materials. Researchers analyzed it. Law enforcement agencies studied it. Journalists revisited it. But beneath all those examinations remained a simple truth. 3 men had died performing their duties. 3 families had experienced devastating loss. And 1 individual had chosen a path that forever altered countless lives. The courtroom provided accountability. The sentence provided consequences. The law fulfilled its role. Yet the deeper significance of the case reached beyond legal definitions. Because justice is not only about punishment. It is also about memory. Remembering the victims. Remembering the lessons. Remembering the human cost of violence. And as the legal proceedings came to an end, Canada was left not only with a verdict but with a question that would linger long afterward. How could a tragedy like Moncton be prevented from happening again? That question would shape the final chapter of the story. A chapter not about crime, not about investigation, not about punishment, but about what remains after the headlines fade and the courtroom doors close. The chapter of aftermath. When the courtroom doors finally closed on the legal proceedings of the Moncton shootings, it may have appeared, from a distance, that the story had reached its conclusion. The suspect had been convicted. The sentence had been imposed. The public attention had gradually shifted toward other events. But for those who lived closest to the tragedy, there was no sense of ending. Only continuation. A different kind of continuation. One defined not by legal milestones, but by absence. In Moncton, time moved forward in a way that felt both normal and fundamentally altered. The streets in the North End returned to their quiet rhythms. Children went back to school. Businesses reopened. Traffic once again filled familiar intersections. On the surface, life resumed. But beneath that surface, something had permanently changed. There are events that divide memory into two distinct eras. Before and after. For the families of the 3 RCMP officers killed on June 4, 2014, life became permanently divided in that way. Before the knock on the door. After the knock on the door. Before the phone call. After the phone call. Before the ordinary evening. After everything was taken away. David Ross, Fabrice Gavorden, and Douglas Larche were no longer names spoken only within their families and workplaces. They had become part of a national memory. Their photographs appeared in memorials. Their names were read at ceremonies. Their service was acknowledged publicly across Canada. But public recognition, while meaningful, cannot replace presence. It cannot fill empty chairs. It cannot restore voices to rooms where silence now remains. In the years following the shootings, memorial services became important spaces for collective remembrance. Fellow officers gathered. Families attended. Communities came together. These gatherings served a purpose beyond ritual. They provided acknowledgement. They created shared space for grief that could otherwise feel isolating. Because one of the most difficult aspects of sudden violent loss is its isolation. Even surrounded by people, grief can feel solitary. Each family carries its own version of absence. Each person carries their own memories. Their own unanswered questions. For the RCMP, the Moncton shootings became a defining moment. Not only because of the loss, but because of what it revealed about vulnerability. Law enforcement officers are trained to respond to danger. They are trained to assess threats. To enter uncertain situations. To protect others even when the risks are unknown. But Moncton demonstrated how quickly ordinary calls can transform into catastrophic events. That realization led to reflection across policing agencies in Canada. Procedures were reviewed. Training methods were examined. Equipment considerations were discussed. Communication systems were analyzed. The goal was not to rewrite the past. The past cannot be rewritten. The goal was to reduce the likelihood that similar circumstances would lead to similar outcomes in the future. Every major tragedy produces that kind of institutional reflection. It is one of the few ways systems attempt to evolve through experience rather than repetition. Yet no procedural change can eliminate risk entirely. Policing will always involve uncertainty. It will always involve moments where decisions must be made quickly, with incomplete information, under pressure. The human element cannot be removed. And because it cannot be removed, the memory of Moncton continues to carry weight within the profession. Beyond institutional reflection, there was also a broader societal impact. The shootings forced many Canadians to confront uncomfortable realities about violence. Not only its existence, but its unpredictability. Moncton was not a city known for frequent mass violence. It was not a place that had been widely associated with such events. Yet violence arrived there anyway. Unannounced. Unanticipated. Sudden. That unpredictability challenged assumptions about safety that many people unconsciously hold. It reminded communities that peace is not a permanent condition. It is a fragile one, maintained through countless everyday actions that usually go unnoticed. For residents of Moncton, the emotional effects lingered long after the headlines faded. Some people avoided the areas where the shootings occurred. Others gradually returned, but with changed perspectives. Sounds that once felt ordinary sometimes triggered memories. Sirens. Helicopters. Sudden noises at night. Trauma does not always announce itself clearly. It often appears in quiet moments. In reactions that seem disproportionate. In memories that surface unexpectedly. Over time, however, communities also demonstrate resilience. That resilience was visible in Moncton. Neighborhoods continued to function. Families continued to grow. Children who were young during the shootings matured into adulthood. New residents moved into the area, sometimes unaware of the full history of the streets they now called home. This is how cities endure tragedy. Not by forgetting, but by continuing. Continuing to live. Continuing to build. Continuing to exist alongside memory. For the families of the victims, time did not erase loss. But it did change its shape. Grief does not remain static. It evolves. In the early stages, it can feel overwhelming. Sharp. Immediate. Later, it becomes quieter, but no less real. It settles into daily life. Becoming part of identity. Part of memory. Part of the ongoing relationship with the past. Many families find ways to honor those they have lost through personal rituals. Private remembrance. Public advocacy. Participation in memorial events. Speaking about loved ones so that their names remain present in the world. Because one of the fears that often accompanies loss is the fear of being forgotten. Of names fading. Of stories disappearing. Public memorials help resist that process. So do personal memories shared within families. So do conversations that continue long after the events themselves. For law enforcement communities, Moncton also became a reference point. A case studied not only for its operational complexity but for its emotional impact. Training programs incorporated lessons from the incident. Not as abstract scenarios, but as real experiences that carried consequences. The goal was not to dwell on tragedy. The goal was to understand it well enough to reduce future harm. Still, understanding does not eliminate sorrow. The memory of 3 officers killed in the line of duty remains embedded in the institutional history of the RCMP. Their names are remembered not only for how they died, but for how they lived and served. David Ross. Fabrice Gavorden. Douglas Larche. Each name carries a story. Each story represents a life interrupted. Each life represents a network of relationships that continues to feel their absence. In the broader context of Canadian society, the Moncton shootings remain one of the most significant attacks on law enforcement in modern history. But beyond its statistical classification, it remains a deeply human story. A story about individuals making choices. A story about consequences that extend far beyond a single moment. A story about how quickly ordinary life can be disrupted. And as time passes, new events emerge in public attention. Other tragedies occur. Other investigations unfold. Other cases enter the national conversation. Yet Moncton remains present in the background. A reminder that even in places considered safe, violence can emerge unexpectedly. A reminder that those who protect communities face risks that are often invisible until they suddenly become real. A reminder that every uniform represents a human life. Not a symbol. Not an abstraction. A life. The final reflection on Moncton is not about the man who committed the violence. His actions are recorded in court documents, investigations, and historical accounts. The final reflection is about what remains after the system responds. After the arrest. After the trial. After the sentence. What remains are the names of those who were lost. The families who continue forward. The community that carries memory. And the understanding that justice, while necessary, is only one part of a much larger process. Because justice addresses responsibility. But it does not end grief. It does not restore what was taken. It does not return the world to what it was before. It simply acknowledges what happened and assigns consequence. Everything beyond that belongs to time, to memory, and to the people who continue living with the impact of that night in June. The story of Moncton is not only a story of violence. It is also a story of endurance. Of a community that faced sudden tragedy and continued forward. Of families who carry love alongside loss. Of institutions that learned from devastation in the hope of preventing repetition. And of the enduring truth that behind every headline, every case file, every investigation, there are human beings whose lives define the meaning of what occurred. Long after the details fade from public attention, that truth remains. And it is the part of the story that never truly ends. Even years after the Moncton shootings, the question still lingers in quiet moments across Canada, not as something spoken loudly in public debates, but as something that surfaces unexpectedly when people hear a siren in the distance or see a police cruiser pass by at night. How does a place return to normal after something like this? The simplest answer is that it doesn't. Not completely. Not in the way it was before. Moncton did return to its routines, but normality after tragedy is never identical to normality before it. It is a version of life that carries memory inside it, even when everything looks unchanged on the surface. Streets are repaired. Trees grow back. Seasons continue to turn. But certain dates remain fixed points in time. June 4, 2014 is one of those points. For the families of David Ross, Fabrice Gavorden, and Douglas Larche, time did not erase what happened. It reshaped it. The absence of these men became part of daily life, not as something that fades, but as something that is continuously understood and re-understood with each passing year. There is a kind of grief that does not resolve itself. It adapts. It becomes quieter in some moments and louder in others, but it never fully disappears. It follows holidays, anniversaries, and ordinary days alike. It appears in unexpected places, such as a familiar song, an old photograph, or a conversation that suddenly recalls the past. In law enforcement communities, remembrance takes many forms. Memorial walls, annual ceremonies, and institutional honors exist not as formalities, but as attempts to hold onto something that cannot be recovered. The names of fallen officers are spoken aloud not because they are gone, but because they are still part of the collective identity of those who serve. But even these acts of remembrance cannot fully express the human scale of what was lost. Behind every name is a life that extended far beyond the moment of tragedy. David Ross was not defined by the night he died. Fabrice Gavorden was not defined by the violence that ended his life. Douglas Larche was not defined by the circumstances of his final shift. They were defined by years of service, by relationships built over time, by laughter shared with family, by ordinary days that once seemed unremarkable and are now understood as precious. This is one of the quiet lessons that tragedies like Moncton leave behind. That ordinary life is not a background detail. It is the most valuable part of human experience, precisely because it is what violence interrupts. For investigators, the case became part of professional history. For policymakers, it became a reference point in discussions about safety and response. For the public, it became a moment that briefly revealed how fragile assumptions of security can be. But for those who lived through it directly, there is no distance that turns it into history alone. It remains memory. It remains personal. It remains something that is carried forward, not as a story that ends, but as an experience that continues to shape how the world is seen. Justin Bourque's name is recorded in court documents, reports, and media archives. His actions are analyzed, studied, and referenced in discussions about violence and ideology. But over time, public focus naturally shifts away from the perpetrator and back toward the consequences. What remains relevant is not the details of his mindset, but the reality of what was done and what was lost. Because in the end, understanding violence is not about centering the person who commits it. It is about recognizing the lives that were affected by it and the systems that must respond to it. Moncton is often remembered in connection with a single night, but its meaning extends beyond that time frame. It is part of a broader conversation about duty, risk, community, and the unpredictable moments that can redefine entire lives in an instant. It is also a reminder that courage is not abstract. It exists in individuals who choose to serve, who respond to calls without knowing what they will face, who move toward danger when others move away from it. That courage did not begin or end on June 4th, but that night revealed its cost in a way that is impossible to ignore. Years later, when people in Moncton speak about the event, they often do so with a tone that blends sorrow with resilience. Not because the pain has vanished, but because life continues alongside it. New generations grow up hearing the story as part of local history. New residents learn about it through community memory. And those who were present continue to carry it quietly, in ways that are not always visible from the outside. There is no final sentence that can close a story like this in a way that feels complete. Because what happened in Moncton did not end when the suspect was arrested, or when the trial concluded, or when the headlines moved on. It continues in memory, in institutional learning, and in the lives of those who were changed by it. The most honest way to understand it is to accept that some events become part of a place permanently. Not as definitions of that place, but as layers within its history. Moncton is still a city of ordinary mornings and quiet evenings. It is still a place where people go to work, raise families, and build futures. But it is also a place that carries remembrance within it, like an invisible thread connecting past and present. And within that remembrance are three names that continue to be spoken, not because of how their lives ended, but because of what their lives meant. David Ross, Fabrice Gavorden, Douglas Larche. Names that remain, stories that endure, lives that are remembered, and a night that continues to echo, not in sound, but in the collective memory of those who will not forget.